I finally wrote chapter 1 on my book I've been working on, and I'm going to share it with you guys. And I just want to give a special thank you to everybody that's been supporting me on this project I've been doing. It really means a lot. So here we go. Chapter 1, Destruction of a Nation. It was a cold and frightfully dark night as Amara walked through the forest after her hunt had ended. Amara was headed toward the mansion where she and all the vampires resided. Amara was second in command of the vampire coven, known as the Sisterhood of the Moon. Serenity was the queen. She was also the oldest among the coven. Amara Skye thought herself to be the most noble of the vampires. However, serving the vampire queen Serenity for over 300 years made Amara question her nobility as well as her loyalty. The queen has always been known for her cruelty as well as for her selfish ways. The coven has begun to question the queen's leadership. Amara is the only one whose faith in the coven has remained strong. No one dares to challenge the queen. Some hope for a better future, and some hope to lead the coven to it. As Amara came closer to the mansion, she could hear screams of despair. Once Amara reached the property, she could see a fire sweeping across the land. Amara stood frozen in shock for a moment. Many vampires were being slaughtered. The wolves had attacked. This was the first werewolf attack since 1996. The year is now 2016. Why now after all of this time, Amara thought. Suddenly a voice spoke to Amara, breaking her mind of such thoughts. Amara, we have to move. We have to fight. The voice speaking to Amara was Rita, a witch who was a close friend of Amara's. What? Amara replied. Come on, Rita yelled as she pulled Amara by the arm. Amara and Rita fought their way to the mansion. A werewolf spotted Amara from a distance. As the werewolf charged toward Amara, Amara took a defensive position. In that moment, Rita spotted the wolf charging toward Amara. Rita extended her hand out toward the charging wolf and chanted an incantation in Latin. In English, the chant meant, by the power of the goddess, I revoke thee. Amara watched as the power of Rita's chant threw the werewolf off balance. Amara seemed rather impressed as she went back to a more relaxed position. I haven't seen that trick in a while, Amara said. There's plenty more where that came from, Rita replied. Rita could be a snarky little gingerhead sometimes. One thing was for sure, Rita was one ginger you never wanted to piss off. Amara and Rita shared a slight grin as they charged toward the mansion, taking out every werewolf that opposed them. The fight was intense. The battle had only begun for Amara and Rita, yet they seemed to sweep through the wolves like a fire spreading through a forest. Just when Amara and Rita were about to open the door to the mansion, a voice called to the wolves. Retreat! Retreat now! The voice was a man's voice. The voice was so firm and dominant. As Amara and Rita turned around, they saw a man standing on top of the fountain that was centered on the property the mansion sat on. The man was tall, with dark hair and eyes as blue as a sapphire stone. The man had a look that could pierce your very soul. Aiden, Rita said. I thought the queen killed him, Amara replied. Aiden was standing before Amara and Rita in human form. Aiden is the leader of the wolves, the Alpha. Aiden is loved by his subjects just as he is feared by them. This isn't good, Rita said. Surprise, Aiden said as he gave an upward glance. Aiden ran off into the night with his pack. Once Aiden and his pack were out of sight, Amara and Rita went into the mansion to search for the queen. As they walked through the castle in search for the queen, all Amara and Rita could see before them were the bloody, lifeless bodies that lay within the mansion. There were many casualties from the attack, losses on both sides. Vampires with daggers through their hearts, werewolves with their heads and hearts ripped out. and witches torn to shreds. So much blood covered through the great hall. Rita and Amora were disgusted with Aiden's handiwork. "This is only the beginning," Rita said as she looked around, her face showing complete and utter disgrace. "It will be their end," Amora replied in an emotionless tone. As Amora and Rita traveled further down the hall, they heard a scream. It sounded like a cry of despair. "The Queen!" Rita yelled. "The screams are coming at the end of the hall. The Queen's chambers," Amora yelled as she ran behind Rita. "Ah!" The scream came again. Amora used her vampire speed to run past Rita toward the Queen's chambers. As Amora opened the door, she saw the Queen on her knees covered in blood. Within the Queen's arms was a witch. "My Queen, is that Irene?" Amora asked. "Yes," the Queen replied. As Amora looked over toward the bed, the body of a wolf lay on the floor. The wolf's heart was ripped out. Irene lay dead within Serenity's arms. Irene looked as if she had been mauled by a wolf. The Queen's face and dress were covered in blood. Her hands were soaked with so much blood. Amora heard Rita walk up behind her. Rita stood within the doorway. As Rita's eyes glanced over toward the Queen, Rita froze. She stood frozen in fear, as if she had went into shock. "Irene," Rita said after a moment. "I'm sorry, I tried to save her," the Queen replied. "No!" Rita screamed. Rita tried to run towards the Queen, but Amora used her vampire speed to intervene. "I'm sorry," Amora said as she held Rita in her arms to console Rita as she cried. "Amora, I want you to take Irene's body and all the others we've lost to the woods. You must burn all the bodies. Even the wolves," the Queen commanded. "Irene was my friend. She deserves a proper burial. They all do," Rita snapped. "I've given my command, witch," the Queen replied. "As you wish," Amora said. "Amora," Rita continued, "there's nothing we can do for your friend now." "Come," Amora replied. "Amora, after you and Rita have disposed of your friends, I want everyone gathered in the library to discuss our next plan of attack. I've recently come across some history in one of my books. I think it will serve quite useful." "I'll see you in an hour," the Queen commanded. "Yes, my Queen," Amora replied as she picked up Irene's body. As Amora and Rita walked down the hall, Rita wiped away her tears as she tried to regain her composure. "Are you all right?" Amora asked as she carried Irene's body down the hall. "I'm fine. Why didn't you back me up in there?" Rita seemed rather furious. "You and I are from different times, Rita. I was taught to have honor. I served the Queen due to loyalty. She made me," Amora replied. "You know, Amora, in the 5 years I've known you, you've never told me how you became a vampire." "It's a long story. Let's get to the woods to bury your friend, and then I'll tell you. Grab a shovel from the shed." As Amora and Rita left the mansion, they headed toward the woods. Amora dug a hole in the ground, about 6 foot deep. Rita chose to have Irene buried under an old white tree that she and Irene used to play by as children. Rita kissed Irene's forehead and ran her fingers through Irene's golden locks one more time. Amora placed Irene's body in the hole gently, as a sign of respect. After Amora buried Irene, Rita began to ask Amora of how she became a vampire. "Amora, will you tell me your story now?" "Yes, Rita, I will tell you. I must warn you, it's not pleasant." Rita nodded as Amora began to tell her story. "It was 1692. I lived in Salem. I was a witch back then. I belonged to a coven. My sister witches and I were called the Mystic Court. I was a young girl just like you when Serenity turned me. I was the young and tender age of 17. One night I left my house late while my mother and father slept. I was meeting my coven in the woods to practice magic. This was before the townspeople discovered the existence of witches. As I arrived to our meeting place, I saw Serenity. She looked like a woman, but had the face of a demon. Excuse me. Teeth like a dog, and eyes black as night. I knew Serenity was no human. She tore all of my sisters apart, with no remorse. Then Serenity saw me. She told me how I would help her understand these new times. As Serenity bit my neck, I crumbled. I fell into her arms like a child crying to their mother. What happened after you turned? Rita asked. In order to fully transform into a vampire, you have to feed. If you don't feed, you'll die. I didn't want to die. The choice I made was to live. I had to do the unthinkable to be able to live on. Amora paused as if she was ridden with guilt. What is it, Amora? The part in the story? This is the one that isn't pleasant. Rita held on to those words. Amora spoke as she nodded for Amora to continue. I woke up and it was still dark. I felt different. I felt cold and hungry, only I wasn't looking for warmth or a hot meal. I had a strange hunger I had never felt. I wasn't sure of what was happening, so I ran home. As I walked into my home, I saw my parents still sleeping. I felt the hunger inside me grow as I stood over them. They didn't seem to smell the same to me as they had before. All I could smell was blood. Amora, did you kill your parents? Yes, Rita, I did. The guilt has stayed with me for over 300 years. As I stood there feeling guilty over what I had done, Serenity came inside. She consoled me and taught me how to cover my tracks. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. But I don't judge you, Amora. I don't care for Serenity, though, even if she's our queen, Rita replied. I know, Rita. We need to get the other bodies and burn them. We have to get everyone gathered for the meeting. All right. It took Amora and Rita a few hours to dispose of the bodies. There were over 100 casualties from the attack. As Amora and Rita headed back toward the mansion, Rita began to question Amora's loyalty to the queen. Amora, why do you serve Serenity? I mean, if she hadn't turned you, then you would have still had your parents and your coven. Hell, you would have had a normal life and not all of this crap. You're right, but destiny has a way of choosing things for you sometimes, Amora replied. True, but how can you be so loyal to someone so cruel? Rita did not seem to understand Amora's code of living. Patience, you should try it sometime, Amora teased. Ha ha, you're funny. So funny I forgot to laugh. Actually, Rita, you did laugh. You said ha ha at the beginning of that sentence. Amora, you are so literal. Indeed I am. As Amora and Rita reached the mansion, they saw Wallace, one of Amora's fellow vampires. Wallace was standing in front of the door, sweeping his fingers through his dark hair as if he was in a state of distress. Amora called to Wallace as she and Rita stood in front of him at the entrance to the house. Wallace, are you all right? Amora seemed to show general concern for Wallace, for he did not look to be himself. Amora, the queen is furious that you've taken so long to handle your task. She's gathered everyone into the library. The queen has been waiting for your return. I am to stand guard until the meeting is over, Wallace replied. You're a good man, Wallace. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Amora said. Yeah, so sorry, Rita said in a snarky tone. Here, let me get the door for you, Willis said, as he reached for the iron knob to open the door. Thank you, Amora replied. Amora and Rita walked down the great hall toward the library, hoping that the queen would understand their reason for not arriving on time. As they walked into the library, Amara and Rita could see Serenity's fury as they walked into the room. "I trust that you have both fulfilled your task, given that you have both arrived at such a late hour," the Queen asked. "Yes, my Queen. I apologize for our late arrival. There were many casualties from the attack," Amara replied. "No matter. I could care less about casualties. Now that you and the witch are here, let's get started," the Queen said. "As you all know, Aiden and I have history. Aiden wants what I possess," the Queen continued. "What is that?" Rita asked. "My talisman," the Queen replied. The Queen's talisman gave her complete immunity from all supernatural creatures, the power of a witch as well. A witch named Thea made the talisman after Serenity was turned into a vampire by Jarvis. Jarvis was from Italy, the 1300s to be exact. Jarvis was arrested for stealing a loaf of bread from the marketplace and was put on a boat to go to the Florence prison. A mysterious stranger in a hood walked up behind Jarvis before the boat sailed and bit him in the neck. The hooded figure disappeared before the crewmen could get to Jarvis. The captain requested that Jarvis be taken down below to receive medical attention. The medics tried to tend to the bite on Jarvis's neck, but it would not heal. The medics did not understand this. As Jarvis slept, the crew feared that Jarvis had been marked by the devil. The captain ordered that Jarvis be killed and thrown overboard before they reached the prison. As a couple of crewmen went down below to murder Jarvis, they saw that he was gone from the bed in his holding cell and that the door had been opened. Next to the door lay a crew member with his neck slashed. Blood covered the cell floor. The crewmen feared that they would be next, so they headed back up to the deck. As they came back on the deck, the two crewmen saw their captain hanging from the crow's nest, blood dripping down like a heavy shower of rain. The two men suddenly spotted the rest of their crew dead as well. Their bodies lay throughout the deck, with their throats slashed. Jarvis had killed everyone. The two men feared for their lives as they were almost ashore to the prison. Once the boat reached ashore, Jarvis fed on the two men and was never seen in Florence again. In 1492, Jarvis heard an Irish village in the northern parts of Ireland being attacked by wolves. It was a village called Darkly. Serenity was a fully grown woman. She had a 14-year-old daughter named Mia. Serenity had a child out of wedlock. Serenity's father lost his wife in childbirth. Serenity's mother died having Serenity's sister Gwen. The village of Darkly had been terrorized by wolves on the nights of the full moon for years. On the night that Jarvis came to Darkly, Serenity's father had handcrafted a dagger of pure silver to use as a weapon against a werewolf. The dagger was hidden underneath the floorboard in his home. Serenity's father died protecting his two daughters from the wolves as he fought them off. Everyone in the village was dead except Serenity and Gwen. They both lay slowly dying from injuries to their abdomens, for the wolves had torn through their flesh. Mia lay next to her mother, waiting to die as well. As Jarvis walked through the village after the wolves had gone, he saw the three women. Jarvis lifted Serenity up into his arms and bit her on the neck. As Jarvis looked Gwen over, she didn't appeal to him. As Jarvis looked at Mia, he saw the daughter he once had, the daughter he lost to the plague. Jarvis bit Mia on the neck and cradled her in his arms as he left the village. Once Serenity woke up, she could hear her sister Gwen preparing to leave the world. Serenity felt an instant hunger and a chill throughout her body. As Serenity moved toward Gwen, she could smell nothing but blood. Before Gwen could speak, Serenity bit Gwen's throat, ripping Gwen's flesh to shreds. It took a few moments before Serenity had realized what she had done. Mia was nowhere to be found. Suddenly a voice called from across the way. It was Thea's voice. Thea was calling to her. She told Serenity to follow her into the night. Serenity did as Thea asked. Thea took Serenity into her home and explained to Serenity what she now was. That night an agreement was made. Thea would make a talisman to give the power of complete invincibility against all supernatural creatures and against all witches. In return, Serenity would have to ensure that Thea's lineage would survive. If Serenity were to ever break their promise and their agreement, the power of the talisman would return to Thea in the afterlife and would never be harnessed by Serenity again. Serenity agreed to Thea's proposal. "Why does Aiden want the talisman?" Rita asked. "Immunity," Amora replied. "I thought you killed Aiden," Rita continued. "I did. I think someone brought him back," the Queen replied. "Who would do that?" Amora asked. "I do not know, but someone is working against us and has enlisted Aiden's help to do so. Aiden wants to harness the talisman's power for himself. There's no question about that," the Queen replied. "It won't work. If Aiden uses the talisman for personal gain, it will render itself useless. Isn't that what my ancestor Thea said to you?" Rita asked. "Surely Aiden knows this," Amora said. "No, Aiden isn't aware of the agreement between Thea and I. All Aiden knows is that the talisman gives the power of immunity," the Queen replied. "What's our plan?" Rita asked. "We must proceed with caution. Aiden may have taken us by surprise, but that will not happen again. Aiden will plan his next attack with caution because he knows we will be more prepared this time." The Queen seemed to be so sure of herself. "We need to hit Aiden before he hits us," Rita said. "Agreed," Amara added. "Which brings me to what I have discovered. Ebony, come forward," the Queen commanded. "Yes, my Queen," Ebony replied. Ebony was Rita's foster mother. On a full moon night in 1996, a wolf attacked some cattle on Ebony's farm. Ebony once lived in a little farm in Middleton, just right outside of Salem. Ebony's son Marcus was killed, while Ebony went toward the cattle guard to see what was causing the uproar. When Ebony came back and found her son's body, Serenity appeared to her. That night an alliance was made. Vampires and witches would stand together to fight against the wolves. In 2011, Rita's parents were killed by wolves. Ebony took Rita in as one of her own. She taught Rita the craft. "Ebony, tell everyone what we have discovered," the Queen commanded. "My friends, we are at war. These vicious dogs won't rest until they've wiped us out of existence. The Queen and I have been researching for a way to end the wolves once and for all. There is no way to live without wolves in our world. They will always be there. But if we take Aiden out, we will weaken them." "That's enough, Ebony. I will explain the rest," the Queen interrupted. "Yes, my Queen," Ebony replied. "My father handcrafted a dagger of pure silver. It will kill any wolf instantly. This includes even Aiden. I left the dagger within my father's house thinking that I would never need it after I became a vampire. Thea took it upon herself to steal the dagger from my family home to keep as her assurance that I would protect her lineage. It is said that Thea hid this dagger in a place that it would always be safe from the clutches of creatures, meaning vampires, wolves, meaning anything not human. Only a human can enter this place." "What place is this?" Rita asked. "A place of holy existence, a church. The dagger is hid in a church in Darkley, Ireland. The Mountain Lodge Church," the Queen replied. "How do you know this?" Amora asked. "Ebony had a vision," the Queen replied. "I want Amora and Rita to travel to Darkley. Rita, you are to get the dagger. Amora, I want you to protect Rita." "How am I to enter the church? I thought it was only for humans to enter." "My Queen, how am I to protect Rita if I can't enter the church?" Amora asked. "There's a witch in Darkley. Her name is Agatha. Agatha will help you. Tell her I sent you. You will find Agatha at a tavern called Hillside. I will arrange travel for you. Ebony will spell the house to remain in a protective barrier until the two of you return. You have 3 days. I expect your return to be on time. Yes, my queen, Amara replied. The queen called the Cranland Airport in Salem and made the travel arrangements for Amara and Rita. They would arrive at the airport in Darkley, Ireland. Once there, Amara and Rita would make their way to the Hillside Tavern to find Agatha. Little did Amara and Rita know, they would find an unexpected surprise at the tavern, one that would change everything. So that's chapter 1 of the book. I hope that you guys enjoyed me reading that, and I'm about to start chapter 2, and from here on out I will give little sneak peeks of chapters. I just gave you guys the full first chapter, a little freebie, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Thank all of you for your support.